Bonsoir à tout le monde. My name is Jessica Squires. I'm a member of No War Pay, and I'm involved with the Ottawa Peace Assembly and some other peace organizations in Ottawa. I'm going to be emceeing. And I just wanted to start by saying that this event is taking place on unceded and unsurrendered Algonquin territory. So that's something we want to keep in mind in all of our dealings. We have a few speakers that are lined up for you this evening, and I want to just let you know how we're going to unfold the event. We're going to hear about 10 minutes from each of the speakers, and then there will be time for discussion. And in the discussion, we'll see how it goes. It depends how much time we have left, but we have to get out of here, of this room, by no later than about 10 to 9. So if the discussion does get truncated, it's because this is such an important topic and lots of people want to have their say about it, but we're all still also learning about it, so there will be other opportunities for us to discuss as well. So I just wanted to highlight that. So we have with us the speakers that you can see listed on the screen, and we're not going in quite that order. We're going to hear from Abdullah Al-Malki first, who has his own story to tell and information to share. And then we'll be asking Denis Lamelin to address you from the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, followed by Matthew Behrens, who founded Homes Not Bombs and is a columnist. Elizabeth May is intending to join us, but she has a committee hearing on the Hill, so we're hoping that she'll make it in time to be our fourth speaker. We also invited Clayton Thomas Muller to come and speak. He's a well-known Indigenous activist, and the impact of this bill on Indigenous activism in particular is of great concern to many people. But we're not sure if he's going to be here. So if he is here, we'll invite him to address us as well. I want to once I've just introduced the topic a little bit, just let the speakers come up one at a time and give their address. So we're here tonight to talk about Bill C-51, which I'm actually, to be frank with you, not even sure what it's called. I just know what it's going to do, which I was reflecting on that today. I usually know the name that the government is trying to, use to paint a bill as something good, how the Immigrant and Refugee Protection Act, which is the actual name of the law, actually doesn't do very much to protect immigrants and refugees, for instance. This bill is amending a number of pieces of legislation, including the Anti-Terrorism Act, which arguably doesn't do very much to counter terrorism. So just to give you a quick overview, and many of you may already be aware of these are the lowlights of Bill C-51. Among other things, it's going to allow for greater information sharing between states internationally with no limits on how that information can be used. And people will, of course, remember the case of Meher Arar. And there are many other examples like his that have happened before and since and are going on now, where this type of information sharing really does need to be controlled. So that's one of the things. It's going to enhance the covert powers of CSIS and make it into a quote-unquote real spy agency. Including it's going to give it powers to do things abroad without any oversight whatsoever. And this bill doesn't do anything to improve the very minimal oversight that does exist for CSIS. It also increases CSIS's domestic powers for all kinds of things, and the only limits that are explicitly outlined are things like acts that would cause death or bodily harm, or the violation of sexual integrity, whatever that means. Which actually, if you think about that part of the bill, it means that CSIS could actually waterboard. This is not an exaggeration in terms of what types of things CSIS is going to be permitted to do if this bill goes through. The idea that they're going to safeguard against any abuse of this by ensuring that a judge has to sign a warrant is not going to address the problem, and I'm sure some of our speakers will get into that. But judges can't be asked to judge. They already are asked to judge all kinds of inappropriate things, but this bill in particular asks for judges to decide things on very vague wording, like in the balance, using words like balance and reasonable and that sort of thing. And we've seen the use of that wording in things like the parts of the Immigration Refugee Protection Act that establish the security certificates process, which has an absurdly low standard of evidence. I already mentioned the oversight thing, and I want to also quickly underline that this bill will also make security certificates themselves worse, because one of the things it's going to amend is the threshold of evidence, and basically say that it will put limits on what the Crown can be required to provide in security certificate cases. And it actually goes against Supreme Court decisions that were made already in two of the security certificate cases. So this bill is basically overwriting some of the Supreme Court victories that the campaign against secret trials already won. And the definition of what types of activities could be considered problematic is very, very broad and could be used against any kind of peaceful protest that doesn't actually have a permit. And the words that the government has used are about legal protest. Well, often protest takes the form of civil disobedience, and they have never directly addressed the concerns that people have about will civil disobedience be punishable under this law? And they have never said that it won't be, which to me I think is a giant danger sign. The last thing I want to mention is that CSIS was in part created because the RCMP in the 60s and 70s was acting as a secret police with no oversight. And there was a series of scandals associated with the RCMP in the 60s and 70s that brought about what we now have, the RCMP Commission, which is the oversight body for the RCMP, and the oversight body for CSIS, and the creation of a separate civilian secret intelligence service, which we now call CSIS. What this is going to do is introduce a situation where that history can be repeated, and it probably already is being repeated. This situation is going to make, this bill will make that possibility not just a possibility, but a reality. So in terms of what it will do to our rights, it's really hard to think of anything that we can currently do in a democratic society that will definitely not be touched by this bill, in part because the language in it is so vague, so broad, and so dangerous. And that's what our panel tonight is about. So with those brief words of introduction, I'll ask our first speaker, Abdullah Al-Malki, to please come to the podium, and we're going to get the projection going.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just a correction on the slide which was before this. I wasn't detained in Algeria. I actually never went to Algeria. I was detained in Syria, and I was detained based on the information and the plots and the work that RCMP and CSIS did with the Americans, CIA and FBI. And if you want to go further in that and see more details of how this actually worked out and how they were working, our federal court submission, which was done last week, and it is on the internet, you get more details about how that works. But today, I'll be talking about, and there are a number of areas which I could give examples which are related directly to Bill C-51. So it could be the disruptive and preventive mandate. If in any chance that you cannot hear me, just throw your phone at me. And then court approvals, and I could mention how the RCMP and CSIS, how they deceive courts. So yes, they can go to court, but they can withhold information from the court. In my case, there was a huge battle, 10 years to get a search warrant, which we actually found at the end that was based on information obtained on torture, which RCMP and CSIS knew that was like this and knew that the information was not credible. They withheld it from the judge. To talk about the arrest without a warrant or travel passports and no-fly list. However, I think what, for the sake of time, what I would be talking about, which may be the most dangerous among all of them, is the information sharing, which leads to torture, illegal imprisonment, torture, and interrogation. Now, to give example how, one example, I have many examples from my own case, and my case is not the only case in Canada, I'm one of several cases in Canada. One of the examples that, before 9/11, so, you know, we keep on hearing that they will share information, and we are presumed, and we heard a lot recently from the minister, that these agencies are credible. Well, this is how credible they are. Here you go. Before 9/11, a good number of years before 9/11, I was being investigated by CSIS, RCMP, a number of investigations. And one of these investigations was a huge one, very deep, involved CSIS, RCMP, Canada Revenue Agency, Customs, and involved foreign agencies, such as the Americans. All of them. And they had the first one, which ended in the year 2000. The second one, very interestingly, it ended a week before 9/11. And they closed the investigation. And they found, and this is the words of the RCMP, from that, the RCMP, there isn't any offense being committed. CSIS, no information that leads them to believe the subject, which is myself, is doing something illegal. That was a week before 9/11, and the investigation was closed. 9/11 happened. The RCMP and CSIS not only fabricated and spread nationally, but also internationally, labels such as important member of Al-Qaeda, imminent threat to the national security and public safety of Canada, and they sent to Syria and other countries. Islamic extremist individual suspected of being linked to Al-Qaeda. That was labeled myself, my brothers, my family, my parents, and was sent to the Americans and others, and was requested by the Americans to put all of us on their watch list. Al-Qaeda recruitment officer. These are some of the labels which they did after 9/11. All of these within less than 4 weeks after 9/11. And the thing is, it's not that they didn't know or they suspected. They actually did have investigations. They knew me very well. They did all these investigations, and I was clear. So they clearly fabricated. Let's take one of these examples, which is maybe the most dangerous among all of them, imminent threat to the national security and public safety of Canada. Now, all these accusations, by the way, the Acapulco inquiry found, the commissioner found, that they were inflammatory, inaccurate, and lacking investigative foundation. But if we don't look at, let the commissioner work and the years and the millions of dollars spent in that inquiry, but the RCMP own documents when they send that information to other countries. So, imminent threat, for example. They send it to Syria on the exact same day. The exact same day that they sent to Syria and other countries, Egypt, other countries as well, suggesting to them that I was an imminent threat to the national security and public safety of Canada. Their own document said, O Division Task Force is finding it difficult to establish anything on him other than the fact he is an Arab running around. I wouldn't comment on it. I would leave it to you because I don't think any comment would give it its due. It speaks a lot about the culture of the RCMP, who they are, how they operate, how they think. But they clearly fabricated it on the exact same day. This is what's internally they have, and this is what externally they say. Now, what did all this lead to? When we have all that information sent to Syria, when I arrived in Syria, I was taken to a place which is infamous internationally for being a torture house called Farah Palestine. They took everything I had, they put a blindfold, taken to a room. It was on Friday, late afternoon. Taken to another room, a huge number of people came in from the sounds that they were making. And a voice said something to the effect, you are here in Syria, you're not in Canada, you don't have a lawyer, you can't see anyone, and you have to talk. And then he gave me a choice, would you like the good way or the other way? Now, since then I always wonder if I chose the other way, what would have been, because I chose the good way and I found what the good way is. After that, he started asking questions. I guess he didn't like my answers. I got a blow across my face that came from nowhere. Physically, it was extremely powerful. However, that physical pain from that slap, long gone, but the psychological and the humiliation from that slap is still with me until now. The way that they took the humanity, my dignity, they crushed it with that slap. And it was a calculated slap. It's a slap that set the tone for the next 22 months. It basically had that there is a master and a slave. They were the masters, I was the slave. And actually, that's how they deal. And I sit on the floor, they sit on a chair. So, everything this is how the setup is, in everything. So the first day, it was, I don't know how to go back. The first day was, it's okay. The first day was, the slide was before this. And that started on a Friday afternoon, ended Saturday morning. They got me to take off my jacket, go on the face down on the floor, raise my legs up 90 degrees. Yeah, can we put that slide up? Sorry. And they started whipping the soles of my feet with electric cable. The one before, please. Yeah. This is called feta, and that day they told me that today it's feta, then it's going to be at the tire, then it's going to be at the chair, electricity and nail pulling if you don't talk. The problem with this is that if you don't have anything to say, and you don't know anything, what do you have to give, and what is there to give them, what is there to talk about? And I got the answer later from them that they tortured me to the point that they were convinced that no human being would be able to take that torture if there was something on their side. That day, while they're doing this, they actually take turns in whipping the soles of in whipping me. These are fit military soldiers, young. They whip with all the power they have, and they get tired very quickly, and they take turns. Every now and then, they pour cold water. They ask me to stand and. Well, they don't ask me, they ordered me. Stand and jog in place, and then they go down, and they continue. Then later, that process, they do it to control the swelling in the feet, and also to keep the blood circulating so that I don't get numb, and I keep on feeling the pain that they were, from the torture that they're doing. The next day, that day ended Saturday morning. They sent me to a cell, which I'll come to describe very quickly. Very small cell, looks like grave, feels like grave underground, like a grave underground. My hope was that they would never open the door again. However, I got up. In very short hours, they pulled me back up, and they interrogated me for about 18 hours. The next day after that was the day when they brought me. They brought a car tire, so this is the ship I was in. They brought the car tire. They told me to take off my clothes. They ordered me to yank myself, told me how to yank myself in a car tire. And I was in this position, which is the position itself is extremely painful. Flipped in half, all the pain, all the weight is on my lower back. Imagine the tire, the tool inside the tire, basically cutting like a knife on my neck. and they would whip with electric cable, mainly on the soles of my feet, but also my head, my arms, and my genitals were easy targets, and they did not spare any of them. This lasted from morning till afternoon. When they took the tire out, I was paralyzed from the waist down and I couldn't move. This was another way that they tortured, suspended from the air from the wrists. Notably, this happened after the Syrians decided to release me, but also after the RCMP sent their liaison officer to Syria with the help of the Canadian ambassador to Syria. They met with the head of Syrian military intelligence, the same organization which was holding me, interrogating me, and torturing me in Syria. And I don't know what happened at that meeting, but after that, instead of the Syrians releasing me, they put me through another round of torture. When I wasn't being tortured in the torture chamber, I was put in a cell, which this is actually a picture of a replica we did here in Ottawa. The cell itself is exactly my arm length and 4 fingers wide, so it's exactly this much. Less than 2 meters high, about 185 centimeters deep. Feels, looks, and smells like a grape. They actually call it eber, which means a grape. Extremely, 24/7 torture, physical and mental. Constantly fearing that they would pull me back, pull me up to interrogation and torture. Hearing constantly the screams of people, and the most basic human need, which is going to the washroom, was a challenge. Now, Canada's partnership with Syria, and if you read the Act C-51, you would see how all this actually, it only made it legitimate. At that time, it wasn't legitimate, it wasn't official. They were actually breaking all these laws. And this is what the two inquiries, the O'Connor and the Akapuchi inquiry, found. But now this bill makes all this legal. Canada's partnership with Syria, you have the RCMP. They sent questions, they sent false information, they kept on feeding the Syrians interrogation material. CSIS met with Syrians, the same thing, fed them interrogation material, all, by the way, fully knowing that if they do this, the Syrians would very likely torture them. External Affairs, the embassy in Damascus, never the ambassador in all his meetings with the Syrian officials asked them to see me and to see my well-being, or asked that I would be released, or charged and fair trial, all this. He actually was facilitating the material to be given to the Syrians for interrogation. Done. Now, what we must have are reforms, accountability, measures to prevent these abuses from happening again. Rather unfortunately, what we have is Bill C-51, which makes all this legitimate and legal, plus you can't even sue the officials according to the Act if they do this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next, I'll invite Denis Lemnay to come up.
Good evening. Usually I say good evening, brothers and sisters, so now I can say good evening, brothers and sisters and friends, and thank you to be here. It shows that this issue is a really important one, about talking about that Bill C-51, and thank you to invite me, because the labor movement too is under attack by this bill, and the labor movement has been under attack for many years by this conservative government. So when I look at the title, it's that real security of a creeping police state. I think it's easy for us here in this room to say which side we are on. In the labor movement, there's a song named "Which Side Are You On?" And I think always the labor movement answered that question. We're on the side of the freedom, we are on the side of the poor people, we are on the side of human rights, we are on the side of the people who are fighting to have a better life in this society. So what I want really fast to share some of my view, but I think the best way, the way I will start, because I want to talk too about CSIS. I will start, I saw that in the Globe and Mail, and I was a little bit impressed the way they said it about Bill C-51, and I want to share that with you. And they said that on close inspection, Bill C-51 is not an anti-terrorist bill. Fighting terrorism is its pretext. Its language reveals a broader goal of allowing government departments as well as CSIS to act whenever they believe limply defined security threats may not will occur. So I think that's exactly show what the overall goal of this bill is. It's exactly what you just said before. They want to have to go after every one of us. They want to know exactly what all the citizens of this country are doing. And they want to file us out in somewhere in a data entry and all these data around the people, looking at what they are doing. So everybody since the last 3, 4, 5 weeks are talking about 1984, are talking about the Big Brother. That's exactly the kind of debate we must have when we are talking of that bill C-51. So to give a little bit of view of the labor and our union, so I'm with the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, so just to share with you some history of our union, to show exactly, because we had us as postal worker, we have an history with CSIS. Okay, so because in the past, okay, COPW has always been known as a union who stand up for its right and support the people who stand up for their rights, and have been known to fighting against the government, and we had in our past many strikes. So in the 90s, at the beginning of the 90s, we were preparing for negotiation. And we saw what happened at the time, because in 2002, there was a book named Covert Entry, Spies, Lies and Crimes Inside Canada's Secret Circus. And it was CSIS. And the book revealed something that we fairly knew, that in the 90s, at the end of the 80s, 90s, that our union has been spied on by CSIS. There was a guy, John Farrell, who has been hired by Canada Post and was part of CSIS, and his goal was to look after the leader of the union. At the time, the leader was Jean-Claude Parrot, and he was looking after Jean-Claude Parrot and all the leader of the union, looking at what they were doing. So they were looking at our mail, they were looking at our banking, they were looking at everything the people were doing. They were spying around the place where people were living and all of that. So, and it's almost 25, 30 years from now. So, and we saw these things were starting to happen at the time. CSIS was already in the mood to go after the people and really looking at what is really happening. And they were trying to interfere with what's happening, with the strikes, with the struggle of the labor movement. And that's what's happening. That's what happened. So the book, I have it in French, and the book is really revealing exactly all the tactics, all the tools they were using at the time to really go after the labor movement. And it's one example. It's one union. How many unions in this country? How many organizations of this country? How many groups who are fighting for human rights are fighting for justice? All of you are part of some of these groups. And we know that Bill C-51 is coming after all of us. Just to show that's what happened at the time. And we went on strike in 2011. So maybe we have been spied out by CSIS at the time. And maybe the other people who were on strike at the time, who were starting to go on strike, were spied on too. And maybe the ones who are on strike these days are really looking after too. So that's the kind of thing we have to look when we're talking at that Bill C-51. You saw the media about privacy, about the fact that there would be the agency of the government, there would be no oversight. But between us, it's already a reality. What this upper government wants to do is to go further, is to institutionalize the way they behave, the way this group are behaving now. So that's the kind of thing we have to discuss with our members, what we have to discuss with our neighbors, the kind of thing that we have to discuss. We have the time, we must discuss this kind of issue. And Jessica talked a little bit about what happened in Quebec. So I'm a Quebecer. So I was young, but in the 60s and the 70s, when the RCMP were doing really some work to really make the people who are fighting for the national Quebec question at the time, make them more on the left and say, okay, they are terrorists. It was them who was doing this kind of work. So that's where we are. And I think what I want to show it's the labor movement, so is under attack. The labor movement has been under attack as organization. We had the Bill C-4 on health and safety. We had the Bill C-60, will really, the government will give, like to Canada Post, what is the mandate when it's time to negotiate. We have Bill C-525, who is talking about when you want to unionize. And you have Bill 377, who is looking after the finance of the union and some other organization. And we saw what this government did to some of the organizations who are fighting for rights. So that's the kind of thing. So the upper government is really attacking the labor movement as organization. They are really putting in place law and bill, and they pass bill with each time they pass a budget, they pass many bills and many things against the labor movement. And we know at some point they want to get rid of the rent formula. So they attack the organization. But what we see now with Bill C-51, they are attacking individual. They put in place a structure to attack organization, to attack the union. Now they are, with Bill C-51, they are putting in place to attack the individual, to target individual when they are doing their own activity. As a union member, I have to go out, talk with the member. We're not with the upper government, so we're fighting. The people will talk about environment later. You see what they can do. And when you go on the picket line, and when you go maybe Saturday, there's a demo in front of the office of the Prime Minister around Bill C-51, maybe. People will be fined, and people will be followed, and people will be say, okay, this person has to be looked at. And CSIS and all this organization, that's what they will do. So we are under attack as organization, and we are under attack as individual. It's why it's so important now, the debate, that we use that debate. It was so important that organization put forward the idea that we must have a committee. So we have people coming in the CLC, the Canadian Labour Congress, will be in front of this committee at the end of the month on March 24 to put forward the idea of the labor movement. That's why it's important now that we have the debate, because what we have, the meeting we have, is the next election. Because we know they have a majority government. We know the Liberals already said that they will support that bill. The only way we can defeat that bill is really make people aware of the impact. And I think it's right when it's right those who trade essential liberty for temporary security deserve neither. That's the reality. That's the reality. If we don't fight that bill, that's the reality. Everybody, because of this security, because of fear, people will say, will support it. So we have time now. It's time to go out. It's what we're doing. And the labor movement can assure you will be that, because it's a fight. We're fighting to maintain our organization. We're fighting to maintain our autonomy. But at the same time, we have to fight to fight for the liberty of the people and the citizens of the country. So thank you for your time.
Merci, Denis. Our next speaker will be Matthew Behrens.
And here's Elizabeth.
And Elizabeth May has just arrived, and we'll thank you for joining us on the stage.
Thank
organizing this event. I'd like to start with a shout out to all the anti-terrorism fighters in Ottawa and across Canada tonight. By that I don't mean CSIS and the RCMP, I mean the women who are staffing women's shelters, because they see the first-hand effects of homegrown domestic terrorism on a daily basis. If this government were concerned about terrorism, it would be putting funding into the kinds of programs that will end male violence against women and children. Just today, the UN released a report that said there are alarmingly high levels of violence against women. It costs the global economy $4 trillion. I don't care how much it costs the economy, but that gives you a sense of the scale of this violence which is being done. And so I think what I'd like to do a little bit is just talk about reframing the narrative. Canada is not under attack, and I think we can all agree about that. We are witnessing a remarkable return to beaver cleaver time in the 1950s. For those of us who grew up in the 50s and 60s, we saw films, anti-communist films in school, where we ducked and covered in preparation for nuclear war, but we also used to see a film in which Uncle Joe Stalin would knock over a thing of red ink, and the red ink would come all the way across the Atlantic Ocean and we would be smothered by communism. And now, I don't know if you can smell the racism, there's a massive hijab coming from somewhere in the Middle East, and it's making its way across, and it's going to smother our valleys, and it's going to de-emasculate the men, and all of these horrible things are taking place, and we can see that Stephen Harper is in law with winning the George Wallace Memorial Racism Award, because you can see him standing in front of a courthouse saying, you come in with a niqab, you come in with a hijab, you don't get into court, you don't get justice. And that's what we are seeing right now in Canada. I wanted to kind of go back a little bit, because I'm really glad that we're talking about the history here. Because you know what? If Bill C-51 didn't exist, all of these things that are in Bill 51 have been done in this country and will continue to be done in this country, because we, by and large, are afraid. People in Parliament are afraid. I think Elizabeth May could probably speak to this. I remember meeting with politicians around security certificates. You bring up CSIS and it's kind of like you're talking about the worst thing ever. They don't want to talk about CSIS. And in the 1940s, George Kennan, who was a US politician and an ambassador to Russia, he wrote a very famous national security document, and basically what he said is this. He says, we, i.e. the West, have 6% of the population and about 53% of the world's resources, and our task in the coming period is to maintain that disparity without harming our own national security. And when it comes to vague and weird concepts like human rights, especially when it comes to the Far East, we simply dismiss them, and we should not be afraid of the use of police repression. So that was the liberal democratic vision coming out of the Second World War, which was shared not only by the United States and Britain, but also in Canada, because when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was being written, the politicians back home, especially Lester B. Pearson, who has an airport named after him, which should be called War Criminal International Airport, but that's another story. Lester Pearson was freaking out because he said, you know what? There's parts in this declaration that if we actually put them into practice, Native people in this country might have rights, and they might actually bring those rights forward. So there was concern about the universalization of human rights. And if you go back throughout our history and you look at the history of the RCMP and later CSIS, their job has always been to repress social movements. It's always been to monitor newcomers and immigrants to Canada. If you read the RCMP security bulletins, you can get them in the library upstairs. They stack this high. They are spying on groups like the Ukrainian Women's Mandolin Orchestra. Why? Because Ukraine is sort of associated with Russia, which is sort of associated with communism. Those are the degrees of separation that have always existed. And in the 1960s, as Denis was saying, we had that real escalation of counterintelligence programs here in Canada and in the United States. And in the United States, that was called COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program. And we saw that against the FLQ. We saw that across this country as well, with spying on university campuses. And we saw that in the 1970s and 80s in the solidarity movements, in the anti-apartheid movements, in the peace movement, in the lesbian and gay movement. The RCMP kept a file on Rita McNeil because she was afraid about how many feminist songs she would be singing and how many labor solidarity songs she would be singing. So what does this tell us? What this tells us is, let's stop being afraid. They're afraid of us. They are afraid of democracy. They are afraid of accountability. They are afraid of transparency. In 1973, a group of industrialists and politicians from Canada, the United States, Japan, and Europe got together, formed something called the Trilateral Commission and wrote a document called The Crisis of Democracy. And their conclusion in this book was that because of the social movements of the 60s and 70s, we were suffering, we being the people with wealth and power, i.e. the 1%, from an excess of democracy. And the role of the Trilateral Commission was to try and encourage apathy. Because they said the only way that we can run a so-called democracy is if people are apathetic and disempowered and so busy with their daily lives trying to pay their bills that they're not involved in community organizing meetings and speaking up for their rights as well. So as we go forward, I wanted to just share with you a couple of things that I think we've got to stop being on the defensive. I was listening to some of the parliamentary testimony today, and I was disappointed because we're falling into the government's language of divide and rule. How many times are we going to talk about legitimate protest? What is a legitimate protest? Essentially, what this bill does is it's forcing activists to say, we're legitimate. We're not like some other protesters, in the same way that for many years, Muslims have had to say, we're good Muslims. We're not bad Muslims. We are moderate Muslims. We are not extremist Muslims. And we even have a situation in which Muslim leaders are now locking mosques to young people who are confused, who are looking for answers, and instead of sitting down and talking with them, we are saying, you are forbidden. You are part of the unpeople now. And that's the danger of C-51, is we're all scrambling to show how legitimate and nonviolent and peaceful we are, that we're taking away the focus from who is really doing the violence. If the Canadian government wants to stop the organization of terrorist plots in this country, it's got to stop organizing them. And I say that with no facetiousness intended, because if you look at the history of plots that have gone on over the last 10 years in this country, the Toronto 18, guys who couldn't organize their way out of a paper bag, but you bring in two agents from CSIS and the RCMP, you pay one guy $3 million and the other $400,000, and they're the ones who order the ammonium nitrate. They're the ones who get it all together. They're the ones who keep it together. The terror plot, so-called, in Toronto, the Via Rail plot, it was kept together by an FBI agent. The plot here in Ottawa, an RCMP agent. Plot after plot after plot is being literally initiated. And the way they do this is they go after vulnerable members of the community. Thank you very much. I think what we need to do is when the government says, oh, well, we've got a clause in the bill, which we can talk about later, that says it doesn't affect legitimate protest. Well, that's BS. Look at this headline from the Ottawa Citizen, June 4th, 2014. Government, this is the Conservative government, orders federal departments to keep tabs on all demonstrations across the country. Federal government is expanding its surveillance of public activities to include all known demonstrations across the country to collect information even on the most mundane of protests by Canadians. So they're already doing it, as they already have, and they always will, unless we put an end to it. We also have the infamous RCMP Critical Infrastructure Intelligence Assessment, in which the RCMP was infiltrating peaceful, nonviolent groups of grannies and United Church members who are opposed to the Northern Gateway Pipeline, reporting on them back to RCMP and CSIS, sharing that with industry, and also sharing that with the National Energy Board. This is a clear abuse of democratic process that's taking place. And we also know, as I said before, this has all been road tested against Indigenous peoples and continues to be as well. I want to give you one very quick example of the kind of brilliant intelligence that is collected by the horsemen and the CSIS agents. 12 years ago in Toronto, 23 young South Asian students had their lives completely ruined in something called Project Thread. And in this project, they were all called members of an Al-Qaeda cell. Here's the evidence. Most of these men, young male students who are from or who quote-unquote have connections to a province in Pakistan noted for Sunni extremism. Imagine being arrested for a hockey offense in Pakistan and you're from Ontario. You might have an association with a province that does hockey. Most of them were studying in what can only be called a dilatory manner. I don't know how many of you are students here tonight, but if you are, you're not home studying, that's a dilatory manner. One of the 19 men once shared an apartment with a man not arrested who was once offered a job by a relief foundation allegedly linked to terrorism. Most of the students lived in apartments characterized by a minimal standard of living and very little furniture. Okay, I can see a lot of you going, I gotta go to IKEA tonight. Some of them knew two people who were not arrested who once tried to go for a walk on the beach of the Pickering nuclear power plant at 4:15 a.m. cue theme music on a cool, damp morning in April. Some of the men once lived in an apartment that had a picture of a gun on the wall, and here we go. This is how it works in Canada. One of the men once shared an apartment with another man, who once shared an apartment with another man, who was once associated with a third man, who once lived in an apartment that once had airplane schematics on the wall. And by airplane schematics, what they really mean is it had a picture of an airplane on the wall. These men's lives were ruined. Many of them were sent back to Pakistan, where they were immediately taken into prison as national security threats courtesy of Canada. Their lives completely ruined. So what do we do with all this stuff? Well, as I said before, hopefully we say we will not be afraid, because we've been there before and we will be there again. But we have a template for this. And this is the 50th anniversary of the March on Selma, Alabama. And if you look back at what black people in the United States were facing, when Diane Nash got on the Freedom Ride bus in 1960, she wrote out her will. We're not at that point yet in Canada. We don't face anywhere near that kind of state violence, most of us anyway, and yet they went forward courageously. And when Martin Luther King was accused of being an extremist, he said, "Damn right, I'm an extremist for love, I'm an extremist for justice, and I'm an extremist for peace." So if they're going to use that language, let's reclaim it and throw it back in their faces. The final thing I just want to share with you, because Abdullah was talking about what happens with Canadian so-called intelligence. There's a new book that I recommend you get. It's called Guantanamo Diary by Mohamedou Slahi. 2 months in Canada, in Montreal in the year of 2000, ruined his life. Canadian intelligence keeps him still at Guantanamo Bay, and this is a round-the-world diary of his torture at Guantanamo Bay, in Amman, Jordan, and in Bagram Air Force Base in Afghanistan. And he said, the torture was so bad that I wrote out over 1,000 pages of confessions about bomb plots, about people I'd never heard of, places I've never seen. One of them involved the CN Tower. I'd never heard of the CN Tower, but I confessed to doing it anyway because it ended the torture. And around that time, there was a man in Toronto named Qasim Mohammed, a Canadian citizen, who was taking pictures of the CN Tower and sending them back to his kids in Egypt. When he went to visit his kids in Egypt, he spent 2 weeks in a hellhole in Egyptian custody, and his life was pretty much ruined as well. That's how dangerous this is. It's very dangerous, especially if you're a member of a targeted group. But let's not leave here going, oh my God, it's time to pull the sheets over our heads. Let's leave here saying, you know what, we've been there before. After 2001, everybody freaked out. They're going to crack down on unions, they're going to do this, they're going to crack down on protests. But when they didn't go after a lot of us who were kind of white and fairly comfortable, what they did was they went after people in the shadows. Muslims, Native people, Native rights activists, and whatnot. And so I think it's our role, especially those of us who are going to say we're going to be unafraid, is to start reaching out to those communities right now. Because every mosque in this city is being targeted by CSIS and the RCMP. Every young person who's a Muslim in this city is being targeted. We who have privilege and are willing to do that need to reach out our hands and say, we're going to walk with you. We're going to share with you the information you need to know, stand up with you when your rights are being attacked. And as the old song says, if you haven't been to jail for freedom, there's still time. I'm just going to quote that. You law-abiding citizens, come listen to this song. Laws are made by people, and people can be wrong. Once unions were against the law, but slavery was fine. Women were denied the vote, while children worked in the mine. The more you study history, the less you can deny it. A rotten law stays on the books until folks get guts and defy it. Thank you.
And now I'll ask Elizabeth May to come to the podium.
Well, I apologize to my fellow panelists for missing the presentations. I cut short the 2-hour hearing on Bill C-51 that's going on right now. I attended the first hour and left to be able to join you, so I'm unfortunately missing Amnesty International and the National Council of Canadian Muslims, who are currently testifying to the Public Safety Committee of the House of Commons. Not knowing what went before, I don't want to risk repeating things. I'm wondering, has anyone given you any kind of detailed analysis of what the bill actually has in it? Okay, so let me try to walk through that as quickly as I can. I think I'll start, though, with the fact that this bill was not initially launched, introduced in the normal way in the House of Commons. As is Stephen Harper's wont, he displays a daily contempt for Parliament and the principles of Westminster parliamentary democracy. And in this case, C-51 was launched at a campaign-style rally in Richmond Hill, Ontario, in which Stephen Harper said, quote, "Violent jihadism is not a human right. It is an act of war," unquote. To this, I put forward some very sage observations from the two law professors whom I just heard testifying in the House of Commons, Professor Kent Roach from the University of Toronto and Professor Craig Forsese, University of Ottawa Law School. And what they wrote is, quote, in relation to this sort of statement, "False analogies between crime and war can contort law," unquote. So this is nonsense that we're at war, and it's absolutely unhelpful to our society to keep ranting on about violent jihadism. Speaking of people who are afraid, some people are so afraid they hide in the closet. So I'm not afraid of this. And I'm also not afraid, and just a slight clarification, this law is not making a distinction between legitimate protests and illegitimate. It uses the word lawful. And on the floor of the House of Commons, I consistently point out that I plan to be part of things that would be considered unlawful protest of all kinds, and I don't believe that this law excludes nonviolent civil disobedience, which it must. Now let me walk through it quickly. It's an omnibus bill. It's 5 separate laws. Okay? So its full title is not the short title. The short title you see in the media, the Anti-Terrorism Act. The full title is An Act to Enact the Security of Canada Information Sharing Act. That's 1. And the Secure Air Travel Act, that's 2. To amend the Criminal Code, that's 3. The Canadian Security Intelligence Service Act, and the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, 5. And to make related and consequential amendments to other acts. This is a 5-part bill. Each part is absolutely outrageous. Part 1 is the information sharing. This is to create a whole of government ability to share information about anybody who does almost anything. This is where the definition of security is an unprecedented, overbroad definition that includes, well, I'll read to you, activity that undermines the security of Canada means any activity including, here's part 1, interference with the capability of the Government of Canada in relation to intelligence, defense, border operations, public safety, the administration of justice, diplomatic or consular relations, or the economic or financial stability of Canada. Say what? It goes on to include interference with critical infrastructure, and then it says, this part you've probably heard before, for greater certainty it does not include lawful advocacy, protest, dissent, and artistic expression. It's worth noting that in 2001, even in the quite awful process of adopting Canada's first Anti-Terrorism Act, beyond our usual criminal code provisions, in 2001, after 9/11, they adopted an anti-terrorism set of provisions, including preventative detention, all kinds of things that were, at the time, we protested quite significantly. They tried this exclusion, and under significant pressure, the government of the day, the Minister of Justice was Anne McClellan, removed the word lawful in front of advocacy because they did not want to create situations where wildcat strikes, public protests, failure to get a municipal permit, raging granny events would fall under the purview of the Act. This Harper administration is refusing to accept the fact that lawful is in fact a limiting factor on their carve-out. I've asked Peter MacKay, Stephen Blaney, and Stephen Harper in the House of Commons, will they not make provisions to ensure that nonviolent civil disobedience is excluded? And they just repeat this and say, I haven't read the Act, and obviously they're carving out lawful protest. Goodness only knows. So this is a sharing that also, here's something wonderful. This is, given what we know about the Arar inquiry, right? Given what we know what happened to Maher Arar, that was all about information sharing. Information sharing is not a benign activity. If you want to share information about somebody that's going to get them in a situation such as Maher Arar went through, you want to be very careful. And the Arar Commission report, and Mr. Justice O'Connor's report, made it very clear that you had to be very careful what you were doing with information. So this act has a part 4, which is sort of paying lip service to the Arar Commission in saying we'll be careful and there'd be feedback mechanisms and so on and so forth. But then there's part 6, which is essentially erasing all of the caveats put in place giving lip service to the Arar Commission. So part 6 says, for greater certainty, nothing in this act prevents a head or their delegate who receives the information from using that information or further disclosing it to any purpose, disclosing it to any person for any purpose. So that's the anti-caveat. That's the information sharing provisions. Then you go into the no-fly lists, which expand no-fly lists. And one analysis of this from my friend Donald Galloway, who's a professor at UVic, is they want us to focus on those pictures of schoolgirls going over to Syria. We want a no-fly list to keep them safe. The no-fly list is more likely to keep Canadian citizens who are being detained overseas and want to get home from being allowed to fly here. You take this in conjunction with things like new laws that let us strip people of their citizenship, hold them overseas. This is a very significant section of the bill which needs to be better studied. But in the interest of time, I'll move to part 3. Part 3 are the amendments to the criminal code which put in place the speech chill provisions that are all, we're supposed to be, and everybody's worried about kids being radicalized because they go online and there are these terrorism propaganda videos that encourage people to get involved. So this is the most overbroad. I mean, we already have laws in Canada that deal with hate speech, deal with child pornography offenses. Those deal with the internet and putting out information that essentially are about the government censoring what's on the internet. So in the case of hate speech and child pornography offenses, we have essentially some well understood concepts, which people generally accept. This, number 1, doesn't have any statutory defenses. Under hate speech or child pornography, there are statutory defenses. This also, unlike those other offenses, does not include an exclusion for private conversation. So let me and it also puts in an entirely new and undefined term, terrorism in general, quote unquote. What the heck is terrorism in general? So every person who, by communicating statements, knowingly advocates or promotes the commission of terrorism offenses in general, other than an offense under this section, while knowing that any of these offenses will be committed, or being reckless as to whether any of these offenses may be committed as a result of such communication, is guilty of an indictable offense and liable for imprisonment of not more than 5 years. Now, this again doesn't exempt private statements. Clearly, the Conservative Party, in promoting over their website and social media the ISIS video that features the West Edmonton Mall, is guilty under this section of being reckless as to whether or not their spreading of the information of terrorism in general is an offense. And they also define, by the way, terrorist propaganda is defined very broadly. It means any writing, sign, visible representation, or audio recording that advocates or promotes the commission of terrorism offenses in general, other than is guilty of a commission of a terrorist offense. Moving quickly, the worst part. Well, I don't know, maybe part 5 is worse. I'm on part 4. Part 4 is taking CSIS, that was created as an agency for domestic intelligence. I think, given the median age of some of us in this room, we remember the RCMP burning down the barn in Quebec. We remember that led to a commission which said we've got to separate out policing activities from intelligence. So domestic intelligence will be done by this new agency created in 1984, CSIS, and we'll keep the RCMP doing the police work, and we'll keep these guys doing the intelligence. This messes all that up. First, you have to look at C-51, this bill, and remember that C-44 is still before Parliament, actually now the Senate. C-44 says CSIS is no longer a domestic spy agency. CSIS can roam worldwide. This bill says CSIS is no longer just about collecting the information. CSIS is a monkey-wrenching gang. CSIS has the ability to infiltrate and destabilize and reduce the threat through anything CSIS feels like doing. Well, not anything. Their ability to act as agents is limited by this section, that says, in taking measures to reduce the threat to the security of Canada, the service shall not cause, intentionally or by criminal negligence, death or bodily harm. Isn't that a relief? Or willfully attempt in any manner to obstruct, pervert, or defeat the course of justice, or violate the sexual integrity of an individual. So, CSIS agents are to reduce the threat to the security of Canada. They do not need a warrant or any judicial oversight unless they decide for themselves that what they're about to do will violate the Charter or break a domestic law. Then they have to go to a judge, and this is unprecedented, and Professor Forsese was just very forceful on this point before the committee. This is an unprecedented constitutional breach warrant. No system of due process in this country has ever suggested that you could go to a judge and get permission in advance to violate the Constitution, and that'd be okay. And they were asked in a committee, do we have partners in intelligence? They're called the Five Eyes. These guys obviously saw way too many James Bond movies, but it's Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and the US and Canada together are somehow Five Eyes. Well, the US, Australia, and UK for sure don't have, because they've checked and double checked with agents there and security experts there, don't have anything that intrudes on civil liberties as much as this bill. Part 5, because I'm going to skip over the rest of Part 4, although there's much more to cover. Part 5 is really impenetrable language, amending the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, in which it says that when a certificate, okay, so this is security certificates that were created under the first of 8 increasingly invasive laws to deal with the threat of terrorism since 9/11. This one's, and security certificates allow people to be held in detention and violate habeas corpus and everything else. When the certificate is referred, the minister shall file with the court the information and other evidence, it used to say, on which the certificate is based, this law says, that is relevant to the ground of inadmissibility stated in the certificate and on which the certificate is based. Studying this was really hurting everybody's head, trying to figure out what this means. It's the conclusion of the Green Party, based on advice from Professor Donald Galloway, that this means that a minister of the Crown can present to the judge information wanting a security certificate without revealing to the judge that the information was obtained by torture. That's what this is about. So that's C-51, which I think we have to move heaven and earth to stop it from being passed. Now that may not seem possible because there are a majority of Conservatives in the House of Commons, but don't give up on this. If we could get the Liberals to turn, which we should be able to do, especially if we start seeing different polling numbers, we've got the NDP on side now, so then we get the Liberals, then we actually can start working on individual Conservatives. You might think it's impossible to work on individual Conservatives because after all, they do what they're told. Except, wait a minute, this isn't just civil libertarian organizations and environmentalists and First Nations saying that this is appalling. This is a bill that's so bad it's got Rex Murphy and Conrad Black saying it's appalling. This is a bill that merges, as I read my daughter put on her Facebook page the other day, libertarian impulses converging with the left in saying, Big Brother doesn't belong here. Wait a minute, what are we giving up here? Why would we give up our rights and freedoms when we can't figure out any reason that any law needs to be this overbroad? Bottom line also, this bill is so incoherent and confusing in terms of what CSIS is allowed to do. There's no requirement in this, now that we've made CSIS an agency that can go out and monkey wrench. CSIS also has the ability to promise witnesses immunity from ever having to testify. So okay, you've got the RCMP over here, you know, infiltrating and getting people to cooperate with them and buying the explosives and everything. I take your point. But you've got the RCMP laying the grounds for criminal charges. You've got CSIS, maybe the people they're surveying, who knows? Because there's no requirement that they talk to each other. The lesson from the Air India inquiry was that the security agencies in Canada need to talk to each other. And they need to have somebody doing oversight over the whole mess. So another argument we need to make, particularly to the general public and particularly to Conservatives, is this bill doesn't make us safer. This creates a mess that could well allow terrorism to get worse. So where we are on this is that a bill that's so bad that it has Conrad Black saying that if we don't wake up, we will, I don't know if you would have ever read this because I very rarely read Conrad Black in the National Post, but this came to my attention. He said, if we don't wake up and stop C-51, we will wake up in a, quote unquote, an unrecognizable despotism. We got voices from right across the political spectrum saying we've got to stop this bill. And I urge everyone to get out and demonstrate on this Saturday for the National Day of Action to stop C-51. Post it on Facebook, urge your friends and neighbors to go, reach out to people in other parts of the country who are your relatives, friends, and neighbors, because there's a demonstration within reach of just about every Canadian. And we need to make sure that we put pressure on Justin Trudeau and the Liberals to vote against this thing, because once it looks like the votes of 15 to 20 Conservatives might make a difference, we might be able to get them on board too. And if we don't stop this bill from passing, we need to make sure that Justin Trudeau and Tom Mulcair are as committed as I am to repeal this bill after the election. Thank you.
Very much to all of our speakers. We do have a little bit of time for some questions and comments. I do want to make sure that the panel has a chance to respond, so we don't have the entire time between now and 10 to 9 for discussions, so just keep that in mind if you do raise your hand, to try to keep your comment or question as brief as you can. And I'll start over here, but before I do, just want to let anybody who's here know, s'il y a des questions ou commentaires en français, nous avons la capacité de traduire.
Et aussi, je regrette que je peux parler en français aussi, c'est pas un problème.
And we do have at least a couple of the panel can respond in French, and I can help when there's others in the room that can help with translation. Go ahead.
Yes, hi. Thanks for everybody for being here and discussing this very important issue for all Canadians. One of the first things I'd like to stress here, and I stress whenever I go to any meeting or gathering for Canadians discussing issues of freedoms, bearing in mind the breach of Constitution, I think breaching the freedom of speech is also another breach for the Constitution here in Canada. Isn't that right?
Yes, freedom of speech is constitutionally protected right.
Yeah, so this bill maybe to some extent also breach that right for Canadians, all Canadians. The second thing, as a Canadian, as a Muslim Canadian, a lot of people do not know some of the history that happened in the past. And this is important so that you look at Muslims, how they look into their lives integrated into the new country or the new state they live in. 1,400 years ago, Prophet Muhammad, when his companions were tortured by the non-Muslims in the Arab Peninsula, he asked them to seek help and refuge. And that's the Prophet Muhammad. He asked them to seek help and refuge from a Christian leader in Abyssinia. And they went there and they listened to the Prophet's advice, and they were saved. 1,400 years ago, after that event, we feel grateful not only to that leader, but we feel grateful for all Canadians who stand up for justice, including justice for Muslims in this country. In terms of other issues related to the bill, I would mention Jimmy Carter, the previous president of the United States, when he said the reason for terrorism in the world is almost one thing. It's the Palestinian issue. We see lots of terrorism in the Arab world is emerging because they have the Palestinian cause that is not being resolved yet for the past 60 years. It is just a justification for all terrorist organizations or whoever stands behind them to launch all these terrorist attacks. One last thing, the guy who attacked the parliament, it was a very horrible act to do in this country where democracy is embraced. He should have expressed his opinion through the microphone and the newspaper. But he was wearing a scarf, which is a Palestinian kufiya. And the newspaper, they were calling it, this is a jihadist scarf. It is not. It is a Palestinian kufiya. And again, that confirms Jimmy Carter's point of view that terrorism is all being motivated by the Palestinian unresolved issue. Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I just have a question. Well, first of all, thank you to everyone on the panel. A question specifically for Elizabeth May. You talked about how you're pretty sure the Liberals are going to be coming on board in terms of.
Oh, I'm not the least bit sure.
Okay, because you seem like you were. I'm just wondering if you I'm hoping because Justin Trudeau is getting hammered as he's going around the country by various groups, and his responses are not very strong. So I was wondering if you had any insights on if people within the Liberal Party have been talking to you about.
Well, certainly within the Liberal caucus, there are differing views, and the difficulty is that in an election year, they are terrified that they will lose the election if there should be a terrorist or something alleged to be a terrorist act, and then Harper turns to them, and as illogical as it is, because this bill, I mean, the question that keeps being asked is, would this have prevented the shooting that took place October 22nd? No, nothing in this bill would have made any difference to the shooting that happened October. You know, if we put money into mental health assistance and drug addiction counseling, that would have made a difference because the person who committed the crime on October 22nd was subsequently killed had gone to a judge in Vancouver. You probably know the story, and he begged for help to get off crack cocaine. So there are things we could have done, but none of them are in this act. But that doesn't preclude, in the heat of an election, turning on Mulcair or me or Trudeau and saying, well, it's your fault. You were against this act. You slowed us down. We could have, done more to protect Canadians. So on the calculation that they're better to vote for an unconstitutional, draconian piece of legislation that's a monstrosity in every stage than get caught out in an election campaign looking weak on terrorism. The question is, where's Canadian public opinion? So if we shift Canadian public opinion, we shift the Liberals. They're not, in other words, their stand is not a principled stand. Their stand is the equivalent of the political closet.
Okay, so I'm going to take the comments and questions in groups of 3 and then have the panel respond. So you're next.
I'm Carl Steeran, the co-coordinator of the Quaker Theatre team, and I'd like to ask Elizabeth May and Matthew Barron's a question. Elizabeth, is there anything that we might put on as a play, satire or whatever, that could get us in trouble in this act? And Matthew Barron's, have you ever been arrested for anything you put on stage or directed?
Okay, and go ahead.
Thank you, speakers. Thank you, organizers. I have a brief comment and a question. And the comment is, I'm an Irish Canadian, and just from a historical perspective here, I didn't hear it, but the Irish Canadian community was subjected to all the laws we've had going back to the 1860s, go back to the 1830s, even on the Riel Canal they were circular. So it's been around a long time. So thanks for the historical context. I just thought I'd throw that little one in because I personally, and people in my generation, I came to Canada in '77 during the height of the troubles in Northern Ireland, and we were targeted. People were sent back home, people died back home, so I just thought I'd share that. One was a cousin of mine. But the question I have is, and I think it's very, very important when you see, and thank you for bringing it up about Conrad Black and Murphy and the editorials, it was fairly good, amazed all of us, the mainstream opposition in depth to the bill. But one segment of it came up, which I thought maybe could be addressed, was I saw articles in several leading papers, and I pick it up in journals, against the legal profession who are writing this damn stuff, and the courts. So what, in the sense of will this bill, we're saying that the judicial system and the legal system and the lawyers who are writing it, the members of the bar are writing this stuff, you probably know that, there's hundreds of them working in the house doing this stuff, nothing else but concocting this bullshit. So is there not some provisions within the legal community, within the lawyers associations, and then to the court? So what kind of resources are in the system to combat this act? That can the act be blocked at all in the courts and through the legal system?
Thanks. And is there a third? The lady down here.
I was wondering about the opinion polling. I've heard that the poll that had the 82% in favor was not a random sample, that it was in fact paid people who are paid to respond to polls. And I'm wondering if anybody, either within the union movement or in your own communities or in Parliament, has information about other polling and what it's saying about this bill and how public opinion is changing on this bill.
I'll ask any of the panelists that'd like to respond to those 3 points.
You want to start?
We also, sorry, Carl, yeah, if you put on a satirical play that seemed to suggest, and you were reckless to the fact that you were, say, tweaking ISIS, I've seen some stuff on This Hour has 22 minutes that could be, by a stretch, caught because the language is very overbroad around promoting terrorism in general. So yeah, it's who knows, once CSIS runs amok, they're not going to be brought to heel easily. Yes, it's possible to challenge this bill in the courts. The lawyers within the Department of Justice, I don't know how they look themselves in the mirror in the morning. They're bringing forward and pushing through bill after bill after bill that's unconstitutional. And then, as you've probably noticed, Stephen Harper has been sharpening his rhetoric against the courts, particularly against Chief Justice Beverly McLaughlin. Not for nothing, 4 former prime ministers in this country and 6 former chief justices of the Supreme Court of Canada have said this bill should not go through, needs way more oversight, is a dangerous bill. And so, yeah, we can get it to court. The big worry I have, and this is why I want to repeal it, is that it's almost impossible to create the judicial context where you end up being able to challenge in court the underground, invisible activities of a secret police force, such as they are creating with CSIS right now. There was an attempt by the BC Civil Liberties Association a while ago to take some CSIS underground activities to court and challenge them as a hypothetical that's unconstitutional. The court said they didn't have standing to do that. So if you're CSIS and you're now enabled under this bill to go overseas, well, overseas will never catch what they're doing, underground within Canada, infiltrating groups, monkey wrenching, and we try to bring that to court, unless you actually get an actual incident where rights are affected and you get your hands on it enough to go to court, the CSIS secret police portions, part 4 of this bill, will be almost impossible to challenge in court later, which is why we have to be sure to be dedicated to its repeal. And yes, Ricky, you're right, 82%, it was an Angus Reid poll. Angus Reid only does online polling with the same, I think, 1,300 people who go online and answer their questions every time. I am fundraising to try to put together, and not for the Green Party, a few of us are trying to put together enough money to get a very good pollster who could just do the kind of poll that actually teases out what Canadians really think about this bill. So I'm trying to move fast on it because I think I'm pretty much there, but look at the bill, by the way, they're doing 3rd reading in the committee on this bill by March 31st. And when I say there's witnesses, you should know they do panels of witnesses. So in the hour between 6:30 and 7:30, they have the airline industry and Craig Forsese and Kent Roach. They were each allowed to give 10 minutes of evidence. So that makes 20 minutes altogether for the best legal experts in this country, whom Stephen Blaney refers to as the so-called experts. So I was adding it up. I think between Kent Roach and Craig Forsese together, they got 30 minutes of actual their time talking, as opposed to members of Parliament either phrasing a question or, in the case of Parliamentary Secretary Roxanne James, occupying her whole 5-minute round explaining to the witnesses why they're wrong with her vast knowledge.
Any other responses?
Just on that about the 82%, I think it's in line with what you were saying about the fact that we have to put pressure on these people. We have time. We have to use the time we have. That's the only way. So the Liberal can move, but they will only move if people are pushing on them. If they feel that 82% of the people are behind Harper, and if Harper is feeling that his base is solid, so he will push for it. So the only way, it's really to have a public pressure. All the groups have to pressure. So we have to go and talk with people, because the people are more linked around the issue of fear. So we have to protect ourselves. We have to be really quiet. So Harper is doing it. So maybe he's wrong. Maybe he's on the side, but at least he's thinking about us. So we have to turn that around and show what he's exactly doing with that bill and with his policy, all his policy. It's not only on this issue. He wants to turn around this country. And when people are talking about despotism, dictatorial way to look at the future of this country, I think that's what we have to talk with people.
Can I just throw in a theater thing? Just after the passage of the first Anti-Terrorism Act, so-called, in 2001, a group of Homes Not Bombs members were part of their weekly vigil at Moss Park Armory, trying to turn that armory in Toronto into housing. And the week before, we had gone in to try and speak to some of the young cadets about militarism, and they freaked out. The next week we showed up there was new fencing, and there was something language in the ATA in 2001 about national security exclusion zones, and they had signs up everywhere so that if you cross that fence, you could be charged under the Anti-Terrorism Act. Now, of course, we found that a wonderful challenge, and we did cross that line, and they didn't use it. But that's an example of what Elizabeth is saying. They don't want us to necessarily have the opportunity to challenge it, because then we can throw it out, and they're not going to listen to a facial challenge. Just after 9/11, the Cowardly Lion is here tonight. I was the Scarecrow. We were arrested at DRIO, which is a war research facility out in the west end of Ottawa. Their mission is, how do we fit 75 tons of lethality, which is killing power, into a 20-ton package? That's what the 9/11 hijackers were trying to figure out, and that's what the Canadian government funds in its support. And just after 9/11, there was a lot of fear. There were hundreds of police, there were helicopters, snipers, dogs, and everything. And we were dressed up as Wizard of Oz characters, and they still treated that as a major, major threat. And finally, and I know Sophie Harkat is here and deals with this on a daily basis of what it's like to be terrorized by your own government. Sophie and I went trick-or-treating at CSIS in 2003, and we were arrested for trying to get secret evidence out of CSIS. And what was amazing is a group of about 50 or 60 costume crusaders put that place on lockdown all day. That's how easy it is to lock them into their own cage. When we went to court, it was one of the first trespass cases I've ever seen in the history of this country where they refused disclosure on national security grounds, and the case was thrown out. The other issue that I want to just raise is about the polling. They're asking people what they think about a 50 or 60 page bill, that even those of us who have experience in this, as Elizabeth was saying, it's hard to wrap your head around this. Nobody who was polled had actually read this thing, and even if they had and they did not have background in this area, it looks very reasonable on the surface if you don't know what those words mean. Disrupt a terrorist plot. Do you support disrupting terrorist plot? Who wouldn't support that kind of a thing? When you actually looked at the fine print, it actually said this is the first such poll we did since Edward Snowden, the ex-CIA agent, defected to Russia. About 3 problems in that sentence for those of you who are familiar with Mr. Snowden. He didn't work for the CIA, he worked for the NSA, he didn't defect to Russia, he got status in Russia. The other thing that we haven't mentioned, and I just want to throw this in there because it affects a lot of people in Ottawa, there's another bill that's currently before the Senate which is very similar to the loyalty oaths of the McCarthy era, the 40s and 50s, which will require federal public servants working for specific agencies of the federal government who are watchdog agencies, so the Privacy Commissioner, various other oversight agencies. If you work for them, you have to put your past political associations for the past 10 years on a government website, and if you are applying for a job, that information will be considered as well. So, we're concerned about the ATA, but this is part of that atmosphere that includes C-44 as well. There's a lot more of this stuff coming down the pipe that we're not even talking about.
And stuff that isn't even in the law, like I'm going to interject because I'm a public servant. There's a rumor going around among public servants right now that they're going to significantly increase the requirements around getting security clearances. So that might be something to watch as well. Okay, I've got a few people ahead of those who put their hands up. So I'm just going to write down a few notes here. And you're next.
I wasn't going to speak, and then I have to bring up the issue of the bloc. I know that it's not a big political factor in the House of Commons right now, but it could very, very well become one in the near future. But I want to bring up the bloc because me being from Quebec and being an independentist myself, but even if I wasn't, the fact that a party that is, on the face of it, dedicated to the independence of Quebec would support a bill that wants to criminalize even talking about threatening the territorial integrity of Canada is completely absurd. And okay, just wrap your heads around that one. And it's absurd on the face of it, but then when you dig, you know, if you scratch the surface and you try to figure out how did they end up with that position, it's Islamophobia. It's because the blog and the PQ, with the whole episode around the charter and, you know, the identity turn that the PQ took under Marois after their brutal defeat in 2007, they're completely contaminated with Islamophobia to the point that they're making it part of their political identity. Like, they're worse than Harper on that question. And it's just a shame, and I'm glad to be involved in a political party in Quebec that is not one of those. And really, if you know, we can try to bring everybody in the House of Commons who could potentially vote against that bill to vote against that bill, I think there's a way to shame the 2 or 3 Bloc MPs into voting against that bill. There's 2. Well, the 2 of them have to vote against that bill, and the 2 independents were former Bloc, should vote against it as well, just because, you know, try to remember people on the panel reminded us why CSIS exists in the first place. There's a reason why we don't want to have that kind of spy agency in Canada, and they should know better.
Okay, go ahead.
In terms of actions that we can take individually, how about a direct email campaign from citizens themselves or a Twitter campaign? Would that be an effective thing? And if so, who should we politely and diplomatically address?
Thanks, and yes.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Elizabeth May, what goes in Harper's mind or his base when you look at Canada reception in the world in the past 20 years and the multiculturalism and how the people admire Canadian society of being multicultural and multi-faith society with the peace and harmony in the society? What was in his mind to threaten the national security of Canada by divide and conquer?
Thank you. Steps, should I give the panel a chance to respond? Or do you want to hear a couple more comments first? Okay?
I've got 3, but do you want to keep going for some more?
Yeah, I'll just get a couple more if you don't mind. Okay, we have lots of people. Okay. At the back on the left there.
Yeah, I just wanted any of the panelists to comment on the link between the physical expansion of CSIS, namely their fancy new high-tech headquarters they've been working on, and the legal expansion of CSIS in Bill C-51. It seems to me that they're linked, and that the expansion of CSIS is something that's been in the works for a long time. It's not really a response to any particular terrorism incident, alleged terrorism incident recently.
Thanks. And Lush right at the back.
All right, thank you. I'd like to say that my main inspiration for getting involved in this issue was because of the Snowden leaks. I was actually amazed at how many people have not heard of them, despite the fact that it's been around for a few years. Just a question for the panel. I'd like to thank you all for coming, because especially Elizabeth May, I have heard you being very vocal on this issue and foreign policy, along with Thomas Mulcair. I would like to ask though, because oftentimes when I'm talking with more conservative supporters, my main ambition is to target this from a libertarian perspective. And so when I talk to them, a lot of them say, well, what's your alternative? Things I like to frame it in the way that, we want to hold them accountable so we can know they're being effective. What ways do you find would be a good sort of counter proposal to theirs, instead of so they can make the claim that we're not coming up with any alternatives? Thank you.
Okay, panel.
Well, I'll just plunge in. I agree that we should get both Bloc Québécois members to vote with us. Good luck. It's Claude Patry and at this point Louis Plamondon. They're the last 2. Direct emails. I think the most effective thing would right now be to friend Justin Trudeau on Facebook and post on his Facebook page until they relent. Social media, where they live, is probably the best thing. And letters to the editor of newspapers. Let me stress that. We need many more letters to the editor of Ottawa Citizen, Globe and Mail, Toronto Star, anywhere you can think of, to say, the more I study C-51, and I really think this is our strongest argument, this bill does not make us safer. The big lie is that this is about making Canadians safer. It's not. It's about giving Harper more information about everybody and the ability to set CSIS loose around the world to do whatever they think they want to do, short of death, perverting justice, and in violating the sexual integrity of a person. Third thing, what's on Harper's mind? An election. An election. What were his big calling cards, and can he use them again? Ethics? Not so much. Duffy trial's coming up. He's been the most non-transparent. There's a lot of corruption. So ethics is no longer a good campaign theme for him. Economy? All our eggs in the bitumen basket didn't work out so well for him. That's not something he's going to go on. So what he wants to do is, the only way he thinks he can hang on to power is to make Canadians so terrified that we can't think straight. Which also involves voter suppression, by the way. So please, as an election thing, in a nonpartisan sense, find someone you know who didn't vote in 2011, bring them to the polls with you. Bring them to an advanced poll because they're going to find it harder to vote because of all the changes in the Unfair Elections Act. Link between CSIS's physical space and new legal? Absolutely. Very good point. I haven't mentioned yet, so I'm going to use your question as an excuse to mention the need for good oversight. Canada has the weakest review and oversight mechanisms over our security forces, even before C-51, of any European Union or Five Eyes country. We don't have any parliamentary oversight at all. Bill C-38, that I think many of you will remember, is the omnibus bill that destroyed the Fisheries Act, the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act, the National Roundtable, also got rid of the Inspector General for CSIS, that had a true oversight role in watching what CSIS does. Nobody oversees the Canadian Border Security Operations, Canadian Border Services. There's no oversight for them. There's a separate RCMP oversight. And then for CSIS, there's the Security Intelligence Review Committee, which is a bunch of people part-time with a very limited budget. And we know what Harper thought about a good appointment there. He appointed Arthur Porter, who's now in jail. Oh no, he's awaiting trial. So counter-proposal, respect the charter, reasonable measures, not panicking, and to avoid radicalization, how about examining some of those basic issues of inclusion, of tolerance, and when mosques keep throwing out kids who are getting radicalized, it's because the mosque doesn't want to be guilty by association. We need much better networking, relationship building, and partnerships between mosques and imams and community to say, if you see somebody who looks like they're going a little over the edge, we want to help. So this business of throwing people out, which of course is only likely to increase their radicalization if they don't have anyone who can properly explain Quran to them in the way that it would want to be interpreted by the Prophet Muhammad. You know, so I think that's my quick answer to everything. I mean, not everything. The questions that were put forward.
I also just throw in a number of communities are looking at municipal resolutions and actually saying, you know, going to their town council and saying, let's look at the population of our community. What percentage of that community is likely to be targeted as a result of this bill, and getting Kingston City Council, Brockville City Council, Ottawa City Council, which represents a very multicultural city, to express its concern. How many of you have gone around the block and talked to each of your neighbors about this? Have a house party in the next week saying, I'm worried about something, I'd like to share this with my neighbors. We don't do that anymore. We just send emails to each other and Facebook to each other. So I think it's really important that we actually get out there and talk to each other. And the CSIS expansion that you're talking about, that's actually CSEC, which is the Canadian Security Establishment Canada, which is so top secret that the architectural plans for this building were actually found on the internet. So that's how good they are at the work that they do.
About the campaign, if I would, I think one of the areas which we have not been able to successfully work on is the young people and Twitter campaigns. I was in an event recently and I was surprised when I came back how much the people who they were in the event, and a lot of them were university students, they were tweeting the event itself. You know, so-and-so said this and so-and-so said this. And looks like that's their life. But at the same time, when we finished, a lot of them wanted to do something and they had absolutely no idea what to do. You know, you feel the fire in them, but they had absolutely no idea what to do, and they're not that well informed. And today I was speaking with a professor at Carleton University, and the same thing, she told me that she asked her students to go to one of the debates about C-51, and when they came back, they were crying. They had absolutely no idea what this bill is about.
We need a hashtag.
We do have one actually, but Denis, did you want to?
No, I just want to emphasize what Elizabeth said about the issue of going to vote. I think we have to pressure, but at the same time, us, as a union, we have a campaign, and one part of our campaign now, we're already heading about this federal election. And what we're saying to our members, go to vote, and have people going with you. So that's the most important thing, because we know Harper is still, he want to comfort his 39% of the citizens of the country. And
of the 60% that voted.
Yeah, exactly.
He's got 24%, maybe on a good day.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's why he's building up. He's building on this kind of idea, that people won't go to vote, that he has his base, a solid base, and you want to give them more to solidify that base. So it's our responsibility to go and turn that around. So.
Can I just add one thing to cheer you all up? Harper doesn't have a prayer in the next election. That's the reason more than 24 conservative MPs aren't running again. That's why John Barrett isn't running again. We tend to be so paralyzed by, speaking of fear, that Harper's got some kind of shot. What he's got going for him will only be voter suppression. So that's why it's so important that you actually find on the basis of a buddy system someone who didn't vote in 2011. I don't care how they're planning to vote, Green, NDP, Liberal, they could be planning to vote. Don't even ask them. Just get them to an advance poll and tell them it's important for them to vote. Because the 40% of Canadians who didn't vote in the last 4 or 5 elections is the single largest voting bloc in this country, is the people who stayed home. They could have formed a majority government. The We Didn't Vote Party with the I don't want to be Prime Minister sitting in 24 Sussex Drive. It would be brilliant. But
Okay, so I'm sorry, but we actually don't have any more time. We need to get out of the room pretty soon, and I have some announcements I need to make and some thank yous. You have a very quick announcement to make, so just do it really fast.
Quaker Theatre team is putting on a 3-minute play at the rally on Saturday. We need one person to play Leonard Cohen, you only have one line, and 2 people to carry on a banner at the end of the play. See me afterwards if you want to do it. You don't have to be Quaker.
So speaking of the event on Saturday, I wanted to make sure that everyone here knows that there is a rally to stop Bill C-51 on Saturday at noon at the Prime Minister's office, which is at the corner of Wellington and Elgin. And so we hope that you can all come out. There will be a good lineup of speakers. The hashtag is #StopC51, and I'm sure there's an equivalent in French. I'm not sure what it is. Probably stop or something. Anyway, there are a number of organizations online that are doing this type of activism right now, and in fact the rally on Saturday has been led very much by people that have not been extremely involved in social movement activism before. So I think that's very exciting and something that we should support.
it's a National Day of Action Saturday. So there's at least 45 rallies across Canada. It's great.
So there are about 45 rallies happening across Canada, including here in Ottawa. If you're looking for websites that announce events that you can tell your family and friends that live in other cities, you can check out leadnow.ca. If you're looking for information about the bill text is available at parle.gc.ca. You just have to click around and find it. And if you're looking for the testimonies from the committees, the International Civil Liberties Monitoring Group has started uploading texts to their website, which is iclmg.org, I believe. It's .org or .ca.
I hope you don't mind, on the Green Party website, we've got a lot of materials for non-partisan materials on understanding the Act.
And so also, and also write letters to the editor and do the Facebook thing and I'm hoping that somebody will do a jam the Twitter feed type thing where we also, maybe we all tweet to Justin Trudeau on the same day about C-51 or something like that. So that event is happening on Saturday at noon at Wellington and Elgin. Hope to see you all there. This was organized by No War Pay, which is an Ottawa peace network and anti-war network that formed after 9/11. One of our goals is to oppose the erosion of civil liberties in the name of national security, and another is to oppose racism and the racist backlash against people of color. And given the intervention of, or the anticipated impact of this bill on all kinds of communities of color, in particular, also on the Muslim community, this was an important event for us to put on. And we put on educational events and rallies, and we're very interested in having you get involved. There's a sign-up sheet available at the back of the room, and we have an email list if you just want to keep up to speed on what's going on. And we also welcome donations, and there's a bucket at the back as well. And I think Matthew has a last
Just one quick announcement. If you are opposed to terrorism, one of the largest exhibitions of terrorism will be taking place May the 27th and 28th at the exhibition place out near the airport. It's called CanSec 15. So we're going to be, Homes Not Bombs is initiating 10 Hours Against Terrorism, in which we're bringing the testimonies of people who have suffered under the bombs that are created by all these corporations, many of them. And many of these invitees are coming from torture states. Bahrain will be represented there. Saudi Arabia, with whom we have a $15 billion weapons contract, will be represented there as well. So that will be another opportunity to take a stand. And I know Elizabeth May has spoken out very passionately about the Saudi deal. And
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I want to talk about. I just think with the falling Canadian dollar, the Saudis just got their tanks for $3 billion less. It's just such a nice deal for them, really.
Okay, so well, maybe that's why they let the price fall. All right, so thank you everybody very much for coming. Merci pour